Okay, could you describe this sound for us?
Okay, it was about this loud. And then about a minute and a half later, half a minute later, I heard...
Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Noreen Boyle. Viewer discretion is advised. Noreen Marie Schmid was born on September 28th, 1945, and she was born in Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. By the time Noreen was about 16 or 17 years old or so, she was working at a little diner in Pennsylvania, and while working there, she met a 19-year-old man named John Boyle. John had been serving in the Navy. The two of them would hit it off pretty quickly and would end up, dating. They both would attend the University of Pennsylvania. John was attending the medical school portion of the school, and Noreen was going there for dental school. Eventually, Noreen would find a job as a dental hygienist, and John was continuing medical school, and basically Noreen was funding it. As she worked, she paid for his school. He, I guess, was specifically studying osteopathy. They would eventually get married, and they would kind of bounce around a little bit. They were in Pennsylvania, they were in Florida, they spent time in Virginia, but eventually they would settle down in Mansfield, Ohio, a quiet, peaceful little community. On February 28th, 1978, their son, Collier Landry, was born. When this case occurs, Collier is now 11 years old. In 1989, the couple had also adopted a 3-year-old girl, and they named her Elizabeth. Collier and his mom, Noreen, were incredibly close. They were a very tight duo. He would later on go on to say that his mom was his rock, and he was hers. Noreen was the absolute center of his universe. They bonded over so many different things. They loved the same things, and they were just a very close companionship. He would do anything for his mom, and he would do anything to protect her or defend her if that was ever the case, even at a young age of 10 or 11. And there were times where he felt he may have had to defend his mom against his dad. He and his dad, on the contrary, did not have a great relationship. John Boyle was known to be physically abusive at times, very emotionally abusive. He was a scary guy. Collier would later go on to say that there were times where he and his mom were petrified to be in the house with him. Collier also kind of took on a more adult sort of persona because he would discover that his dad was having an affair with a woman later named as Sherry Lee Campbell. And Collier found out that this woman was pregnant. Collier, being the very protective son and very close to his mom, would tell Noreen, I think Daddy's having, I think he's with another woman. I think he's seeing somebody else. At first, Noreen's a little hesitant to believe it, but ultimately she does, because Collier told her that he saw a ring on this woman's hand. His dad was not even remotely ashamed of introducing this woman to Collier, but it looked as if John was planning to marry this woman, even though he's still married to Noreen. And so by the time, Collier tells this to Noreen, she kind of starts figuring things out on her own. With the abusiveness, emotional and physical, with Collier not being comfortable in the house, afraid for their daughter Elizabeth, she eventually will file for divorce. She does so in November of 1989. The divorce proceedings essentially had just gotten started, but around this time, John had purchased a new property in Erie, Pennsylvania. This really big, lavish, beautiful home on a very large open property. And I think the plan was eventually for them to relocate to that home in Pennsylvania. John was still going through with it, even though Noreen is basically saying, hey, I'm divorcing you. And during the initial portions, in the late November or so, early December, Noreen is having a conversation with her son Collier, and she flat out tells him, if anything happens to me, it's your dad. He did it. That obviously gave him a lot of concern, but he also wasn't like, he wasn't like not believing it. He would believe that his dad might do something to her. Which takes us to December 30th, 1989. At that point, the holidays, Christmas had just passed. John's mom is in town visiting. They're at their home still in Mansfield, Ohio. And according to a witness, Noreen was on a phone call with a friend that same night. And Noreen told the friend in a joking manner, well, I guess, John's not going to kill me tonight because his mom's here, so he wouldn't do that. This was actually one of the last things Noreen would ever say to anyone. Rolling into December 31st, it's now the very, very early morning hours. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. 11-year-old Collier woke up to what sounded like a scream, a female screaming. Then he heard a loud thud. And then 30 seconds to a minute passes by, he hears another thud. 3-year-old Elizabeth was actually sleeping in the room with Noreen and John. 3-year-old Elizabeth would later tell police that she saw Daddy hit Mommy and then made some mention of like a bag, like rolled her up like a snowman in a bag, something like that. Collier wakes up from, his sleep after hearing all these noises, and he kind of walks around the house where he eventually goes down and sees his dad sitting on the couch. Now, he had waited some time before leaving his bedroom. I think it petrified him, these noises and the scream and all that. So this was a little bit sometime later. When he notices his mom is no longer in the house, he asks his dad, like, where is she? And John responds to him with, oh, Mommy's took a vacation, a really sudden impromptu vacation. And after like a day or so, and he hadn't heard from his mom, Collier's like, well, shouldn't we do something? Maybe report her missing? And his dad was like, no, you're not going to do that. If you do so, I'm going to punish you. Collier was convinced his dad did something to his mom. He just knows who his father is, his behavior in the past, his violent streak, the fact that he knows he's having an affair, he might have gotten another woman pregnant, the fact that there's a divorce going on, those noises he heard, the screaming, he knows something happened. And so he actually ends up calling all of Noreen's friends and co-workers and family and saying, I'm really concerned about something that happened to my mom. Again, he's 11 years old when he's doing this. And at that point, the friends and family are also now concerned, and they report Noreen missing to the police. So by January 1st, 1990, police are now interviewing John at his house with regards to his missing wife. John tells police, me and Noreen, we got into a loud argument. She threw this big old stack of credit cards at me and screamed at me and stormed out. He then says he saw her running out of the house, getting into a car driven by someone he did not know. He had never seen the car before, and Noreen left, and she hasn't been seen since. Now, he says this happened around 10 p.m., which already everyone knows is a lie. First, Collier heard the thuds and the scream at 3 o'clock in the morning. This was hours after John claims he last saw Noreen. The other thing is that there were neighbors who were outside around that time who did not see anyone leaving the Boyle residence at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. or midnight. They didn't see any cars driving away. They didn't hear any cars driving up or away. They were completely contradicting John's story. Meanwhile, John and John's mom basically infer that Collier was the one to report his mom missing after they told him not to. And so they became even bigger assholes to him, including John's mom. His own grandmother was also being a complete dick to Collier. Now, unbeknownst to John, Collier is actually working with police. Again, this 11-year-old child is basically going to police in these secret little meetings and saying and giving them all the evidence he might have collected or had with regards to what's, happening with his dad. He says he found pictures of his dad with this other woman at the Erie, Pennsylvania house, this brand new house. John would later go on to tell police, I think you're hypnotizing my kid. You're manipulating him to say things against me because you want me to be the person whoever did whatever to Noreen. I didn't do anything to her. Well, police are looking into his movements, and they uncovered that John had went to a rental place to rent a jackhammer, and he rented it in Mansfield, Ohio. And he did so 2 days before Noreen disappeared. They also would look at the contract of this house that they purchased in Erie, Pennsylvania, because I think everyone assumed that Noreen really knew about it. and that she was the one to sign the documents and all that for the house, purchase of the house. Well, when police speak to the actual people involved with selling the house, they are shown a picture of Noreen, and they're like, that's not the woman we saw. That's not the woman who was with him. And the name on the signature name underneath John's was a name that was written as N. Sherry Boyle, which would indicate the N would be for like Noreen Sherry Boyle. However, Sherry was not Noreen's middle name, but that name was lining up with the mistress. John Boyle also had inquired about to the people who were selling the house, like, can we, dig up the basement? Can we lower the basement floor a little bit? And his excuse was, well, my son Collier likes to play basketball and I would like him to be able to do it in the basement. It's random. John Boyle was also very persistent. He was adamant that that house in Erie needs to be cleared out so that I can move in by January 1st. It was like a sudden thing. He needed it to be done. They would also investigate the mistress, Sherry Campbell. They go to a property that's actually owned by her uncle, and they see this massive chunk of cement, these big cement blocks that have been just sort of on the side yard of the mistress's uncle's property. That's very strange because there was no concrete being dug up anywhere on the uncle's property. And so they finally are able to get a warrant to search the new home in Erie, Pennsylvania. When that warrant is granted, Collier tells the detective he's been working with, my dad said he's taking me to Florida. I'm not sure if I'm coming back alive. But by the time before they were able to leave for Florida, the police intervened and served the warrant so that John had to stay there. They noticed the basement flooring. There was a large chunk of it that appeared to be brand new. It was also still kind of soft, like it wasn't totally cement yet. And they saw these brand new shelving units built in over this new cement. So the warrant allows them to remove all of that new shelving. And they also found this big thing of, green carpeting that they confirmed that John had purchased from a local store in the days leading around the disappearance of Noreen. And that's the green carpeting they found underneath or above the cement. So they pull up the carpeting. They also then begin to shovel away the cement because it's still really soft. And as they keep digging, the cement is even, still not solid yet down there. They find that there's an odor that permeates from this still soft cement, and it smells like death. And they continue digging and digging until they uncover a human body. It was the body of a woman. The woman was nude, and she had been in a pretty serious state of decomposition at that point. The woman had a Rolex wristwatch on, and it was engraved with Noreen's initials. The watch stopped on December 31st, the very same night Noreen disappeared. The coroner would eventually determine that these were the remains of Noreen Boyle. Noreen had died of suffocation and blunt force trauma, which goes in line with what 3-year-old Elizabeth said, that Daddy hit Mommy with something, basically implying that he bludgeoned her over the head. And John Boyle was the one and only suspect in this, and that was large in part due to his 11-year-old son, Collier, basically ratting him out and working with detectives. He was extremely brave to do any of this. He knew how violent his dad was. He knew how scary his dad was and what he may do to him, if anything should happen. But John Boyle is then arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Noreen. The prosecution's star witness was Collier himself. Collier would recount this statement on the stand.
I told her, I said, Mom, please sit down. And she says, why, Collier? I said, just please sit down. There's something I have to tell you. And she said, okay. I said, I think Daddy has a girlfriend. And then she said, no, Collier, that's impossible. He can't have a girlfriend. And I explained to her that Daddy had kissed her and hugged her and stuff like that. And I admitted to my mother that I did, and she said, that's okay. She said, I knew I was in an impossible position. I heard a thud, a little.
Okay, could you describe this sound for us?
Okay, it was about this loud. And then about a minute and a half later, half a minute later, I heard a thud like this. It's even louder. And at that time, I was petrified. I was just scared.
He flat out said, my dad did this. He killed Noreen. This is what I heard that night. This is what I saw that night. And he testified how abusive he was, how manipulative he was, how he was cheating, having affairs, having babies with other women. All of this stuff Collier saw. He testified about it at trial. This was a very high-profile case. I mean, this is a guy who is now in the medical profession, who's a very prominent figure in the community, a very wealthy man, seemingly liked by people who didn't really know he was a monster. But it was his own son that did him in. And John Boyle was convicted of his wife's murder and sentenced to prison. He got a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Collier, Landry, and Elizabeth would eventually go into the foster care system, and Collier was soon adopted by a really lovely family, and they raised him. I'm not 100% sure what occurred with Elizabeth, though. But, the trauma that Collier experienced and having to testify against his own dad for killing his mom, a woman he was just, that's something that's going to mess a person up pretty badly. But he really kind of battled through it, and he eventually would move to Los Angeles, where he began working in films. And he's I think now a cinematographer, and he's doing really well for himself. I know he hasn't seen Elizabeth, his adopted sister, since 1990. So once this all happened, he never really saw her again. His story would be told in a documentary called A Murder in Mansfield. This case was at one point featured on Forensic Files. This was a really high-profile story. And at the center of all of it really was a mother and a son. Who were a really close, dynamic duo. They loved each other very much. They were each other's best friends, and Collier stood up for his mom, even at the risk of his own safety, against his very unpredictable and violent, abusive father. He stood up to him, essentially, and he is one of the primary reasons why his dad's in prison. Later on, John Boyle would try to appeal, stating, well, that body that you guys found, that's not Noreen. You misidentified her. There's no way it's her. And so this would actually prompt them to exhume the body and do more thorough testing. And they confirmed without a shadow of a doubt that the woman they found buried underneath that concrete in the Erie, Pennsylvania home was Noreen. And it's like, also, John, this was your house and a body was found underneath it in freshly dug cement after you told people, the homeowners, I want to dig up the basement. Like, even if it wasn't her, you had a body in your basement. Like, but it was her. Confirmed. No question about it. It was Noreen. And he is still, to this day, sitting in prison. He has tried to get parole many times, but so far, no luck, thankfully. His next parole hearing, from what I understand, is not set for October of 2025, which is the year I'm filming this. It's February 2025. But thanks to a very dedicated and loving son who was extremely brave, he was able to help get his mom's justice. And Noreen Boyle got the justice she very rightfully deserved. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new to this channel, I tell, obviously, true crime stories several times a week. So please subscribe to the channel if you're into that kind of thing. Give this video a like, leave a comment. It helps more people see it. Share the video if you like on other platforms. Make sure you hit the bell so you're notified of all of my future uploads. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. My TikTok link is in the link tree, which is in the description of this video below. Please feel free to follow that. But I do also post compilation videos every month from my TikTok pages. So if you don't have TikTok, you can still see those videos at the end of the month here. Also in that link tree below, you're going to find my case list. It's a really long list. It's pretty much in alphabetical order, but if you scroll through it and you don't see a name on there that you want me to cover, just send me a really quick email and I'll add that name to my list. All I need to know is the name of the case, where it happened and when it happened, and then I'll add it. I pick my cases at random typically, so I can't promise you when I'll cover that case, but if you are a loved one, a direct loved one to a murdered or missing individual, please let me know in the email so I can make that a higher priority. But with that being said, that is the end of this video, and until the next case, ta-ta for now. True crime, rooney dooney 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 doonies. No.